You're not measuring success against, did I hit my macros perfectly? Did I work out 7 days this week? Did I follow this, supplement routine? Like, it's not 10 different things. It's just very basic 3 things. And now you give yourself credit when you complete those 3 things. You follow through on your commitment card. And what that does is it solidifies the behavior because you get a dopamine response when you complete the task, and it builds self-trust. And every time you follow through on those commitments that you make to yourself, you're just making little deposits into that self-trust bank account.
Welcome to the Wits and Weights podcast. I'm your host, Philip Pape, and this twice-a-week podcast is dedicated to helping you achieve physical self-mastery by getting stronger, optimizing your nutrition, and upgrading your body composition. We'll uncover science-backed strategies for movement, metabolism, muscle, and mindset with a skeptical eye on the fitness industry so you can look and feel your absolute best. Let's dive right in. Wits and Weights community, welcome to another episode of the Wits and Weights podcast. Today, I'm extremely excited to welcome to the show Mike Millner, a high-level nutrition coach and a business coach of mine who has a gift for understanding the personality-based needs of his clients and where people are in their journey. He was gracious enough to have me on his show, Mind Over Macros, and I wanted to bring him on to share his vast experience as a coach. In this episode, Mike and I are unpacking the DNA of success to understand why so many of us fail at hitting our health and fitness goals. Transformation goes way beyond calories in, calories out, all the way to the hidden barriers that hold us back. And so we are talking about the mental game. This isn't just another how to lose weight talk. This is a how to crush your goals and redesign your identity kind of conversation. Now imagine being on every end of the spectrum when it comes to dieting. Overweight, insecure, skinny fat, and embarrassed to step foot in the gym. How would you feel? How would you cope? How would you change? That's exactly what my guest today has gone through in his own personal journey. Coach Mike has experienced the highs and lows of dieting and fitness, and he's learned how to overcome the psychological barriers and challenges that prevent most people from achieving their goals. Mike's the founder of Peak Optimization Performance, or POP, and the voice behind the very popular Mind Over Macros podcast, where he shares his insights and expertise on nutrition, training, and most importantly, mindset. His goal is to help as many people as possible navigate through life as a healthy individual in a way that's sustainable and enjoyable. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. That was definitely the best intro I've ever received on a show. So
that's the goal here, man. And it's well-deserved. And you've talked about that journey a lot on your podcast, not just being overweight, but also feeling ashamed, dealing with orthorexia, trying and failing over and over again, and then eventually finding, balance, some sense of balance, right? And empowerment over your health to the point where you can help others. So what was the pivotal moment that, to use your words, shifted your beliefs from uncertainty, from insecurity to confidence in achieving your goals?
Yeah, really, if I had to distill it down to one moment, it would be actually asking for help and getting the support that I needed. I tried, I think I was very driven by my own ability to figure things out, almost to the point of stubbornness, and maybe you could call it just, ego, because I felt like, I grew up an athlete. I was very competitive. I like to win. And so it was like that mindset, like, well, if I fail a diet, it's my fault because I just need to try harder. I just need to be more disciplined. I just need to have more willpower. And I know that I can do this. I know that I can quote unquote win. And it just kept me in this perpetual cycle of failing and blaming myself and being like, why can't you do this? Why can't you be successful? So it really was a moment of just, why do I feel the need to just continue to struggle and put myself in a position where my life was literally crumbling around me, where I was impacting relationships that were important to me, where I was losing people that I loved because of my obsession with trying to lose weight. And I had a horrible relationship with my body, I had a horrible relationship with food, horrible relationship with exercise. And I was, quite frankly, just alone. And it was just me and my chicken and broccoli, and I was watching everything else fall apart. And yeah, it was really that kind of rock bottom moment where I was like, I need some help. So the pivotal moment for me was really asking for support and finding a coach and mentor that actually poured into me to give me the belief and the permission to fail and to try again, and to recognize that, even though, maybe it wasn't my fault that a lot of those diets were unsuccessful, it was my responsibility to do things differently if I wanted a different outcome. And it was really that shift of, belief and support and accountability and permission to be myself and to do things my own way that was the catalyst for the change that I needed to make.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you, it's not about the process necessarily, or the how, or the nuts and bolts, the nitty gritty. It was the accountability and the support. Like you said, ego and stubbornness. I talk all the time on this podcast about how just seeing a coach for one session can blow your mind in terms of what, not only what you learn, but the different perspective and how somebody can help move you forward. Would you say that how did your mental evolution mirror your physical changes? Did they go hand in hand, or did one come first? Did this mental shift, did this accountability and finding help really drive the physical changes eventually?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when, the first time I had a 2-hour Skype session with Christian Thibodeau. So he was my first mentor that really, really opened my eyes, and he did not charge me anything for it. He, I followed him and read his articles on T Nation, and a lot of like the psychology based work that he was doing just resonated with me, because that's the way that my brain works. I love to know the why and the how behind things. Why are humans the way that we are? Why do we do the things that we do? And he explains a lot of that in his writing. So I reached out to him on a whim, thinking there's no way that this guy's, big shot T Nation writer has replied to me. Not only did he reply right away, but he's like, hey, here's my Skype, message me or let's set up a Skype call, and sat on the call with me for 2 hours. And the first question, as I'm going over my journey, the first question was, have you ever considered that all of the things that you've been trying, like, weren't actually built for you? And I was like, no, I actually have not considered. It seems so obvious when you say it. You're like, yeah, of course. But I was like the classic, like, just tell me the rules and I'm going to follow the rules. But he's like, have you ever considered that those rules like weren't actually meant for you? And I was like, no, truthfully, I haven't. So it was that just little shift in perspective to be like, oh my God, there's this whole other possibility out there that I didn't even consider, that maybe I've been barking up the wrong tree, that I need to actually understand what my body responds to, what fits my disposition and my personality and my unique characteristics and values and traits, and, everything from the physical to the mental. And so it was really that belief shift that opened my eyes. So I think that if I didn't have the belief, I don't think the physical acts would have followed. But it was just that little bit of hope that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, led me on the path to changing some of the things that I was doing physically, and looking at it through the lens of sustainability and permanent results and a lifestyle shift and an identity shift. So I would have to say that the mental frame had to come first before the physical frame could follow.
And that makes a lot of sense, because you've talked about how you went through physical transformations in the past. They just didn't stick, right? As we all have. We might know exactly what we think we need to do and even take the action to do it, and still somehow it doesn't stick. So I'm just going to repeat what you just said, quote, have you considered all the things you've been trying were not meant for you, right? I think that's really important. So let's talk about kind of distinction between what people think works in the physical realm versus what the big picture really says. Let's talk about energy balance, right? We know that calories in, calories out is the physics behind weight loss, behind fat loss. But we also know from coaching real human beings, and like you just said, that that's just a tiny piece of the picture when it comes to getting your goals. And a lot of this stuff is unhelpful without context. Where does it fit in here? What's the bigger picture when it comes to actually achieving your goals for the long term?
Yeah, I think the problem with energy balance in that conversation is it really does present things through a short-term lens. And I don't think that there's ever the context of like, what's the forever plan? And I think the biggest shift that needs to be made as a whole for somebody to really be successful. And when I say success, I mean, you reach your goals and you stay there, because we typically don't have weight loss issues. We have weight maintenance issues. And I think a lot of the things that are perpetuated in social media, on the internet, wherever you're getting your information, it's a very short-term lens. It's a very, it's 6-week challenges, it's 30-day detoxes, even the calorie balance equation, factually speaking, yes, we have to be in an energy deficit in order to lose weight, but you just don't, it's not the type of thing where you eat less and then you just ride it out forever. And that's the forever plan. So nobody ever talks about that. Like, this is a very short-term intervention. And I find that message to be more damaging than helpful, because what most people do when they hear that message is they start trying to eat less, and then they try to eat less and less and less, and they try to extend the timeline of eating less, and inevitably they break and they reach that tipping point because they don't understand, like, your body is trying to survive, your body's trying to adapt to the signals that you're sending it. So when you start moving less because you have less energy, when you have more cravings, when your hunger is through the roof, when you're fatigued, when you have hormonal imbalances, when you lose your sex drive, when you're getting sick more frequently, all of those can be a product of putting too much stress on your system, and eating less is a stress on the system. And I just don't think that we paint enough context when we deliver that message to say, what's the long-term plan? If somebody, I think it should be a requirement that if somebody is going to put out the message of calories in, calories out, it has to be followed up with the caveat of this is a very short-term intervention. And if you don't know how to transition out of that into maintenance to restore homeostasis, to give your body what it needs to thrive long-term, then we're really doing everyone a disservice.
Yeah. And I think if you put it before that, a fat loss phase is not fun. It's not meant to be this enjoyable thing that you stick with forever. But I want to peel back the onion a little bit on the weight loss messaging overall. Like on this show, I tend to use the term fat loss more than weight loss these days, but I know it's prevalent in the industry, and I know it helps with marketing and things like that. What are your thoughts on the phrase in general and the fact that people put so much importance into weight loss?
Yeah, I think, again, it's the diet industry is very smart. Like, you have people who are marketing geniuses, really. And that's why the industry is up to, I think, 80 billion annually. So they're doing something, quote unquote, right, depending on your definition of right. If you measure it by financial success, then sure. But if you measure it on permanent results, then I would say that it's pretty harmful. But as long as people keep feeding into that message, meaning when we talk about weight loss, when we make promises about how much weight you can lose in the shortest amount of time. Now, I was the most susceptible person to that marketing. When I was in the depths of my dieting phases and years, it was the quicker the results, the more bold the results, because again, like it fed my ego of, oh, I can do that. Like I can win in the next 6 weeks and lose, 30, 40 pounds. I'm going to get after it and be perfect. And, it creates a disordered mindset. It really does. And it's almost a guarantee that if you take that approach, you're going to gain the weight back and you're going to feel worse and you're going to set yourself up for a more difficult road ahead, because the more that we lose weight and gain it back, the more that we restrict and deprive ourselves, it does make it harder in the future to improve your body composition. So I think that, the difference between weight loss and fat loss, obviously there's a major difference. Even the fat loss messaging, I think really what we should be talking about is permanent results, sustainable results, enjoyable results, lifelong results, however you want to frame it. Whether we're talking weight loss, whether we're talking fat loss, we're talking about getting leaner, more toned, looking more athletic, like whatever phrase resonates with you and you're like, yes, that's what I want. Let's make sure that we package it in a permanent, sustainable way.
Yeah, no, I love that. And like the phrase I use is looking like you lift, right? And it's okay for it to be about physique, but like you said, it's got to be something that's sustainable. Some people hear that and then they think, okay, does that mean I have to have willpower, discipline, and those things forever, right? And I know you're probably familiar with Angela Duckworth and her work on grit, or that grit and perseverance, stick with itness is important for achieving a goal. What are your thoughts on that? And maybe it's distinct from willpower and discipline, but just tell us about your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think a lot of times there's characteristics that get thrown around that we do need, but I think that sometimes we unnecessarily tax those systems. And like any resource is a finite resource. And so whether we're talking about energy, attention, time, money, there's always a trade-off, and there's always a limited amount of that given resource. So where I'm putting energy to, where I'm putting attention to, it's taking away from something else. So it better be something that's important and meaningful. And the reason why I say that is because, I have this concept of resource allocation. And I think a lot of times we don't even look at where are we spending unnecessary resources that could be put to better use elsewhere. So if you're signing up for a program and it requires 24/7 willpower, that's horrible use of the resource of willpower. If it requires you to, kind of grit your teeth and white knuckle your way through it, eventually you're going to run out of that resource. So if we look at everything through that lens, it's like, going in with a full tank of gas. Like if I can get to my destination using less gas, why wouldn't I choose that path? So that's the way that I perceive discipline, willpower. Do we need them? Absolutely. But we all have them and we can all build them, and we can find ways to not rely on them. So one of the most effective strategies for willpower is to not need it as frequently. And if you don't need it as frequently, you have it in the moment. You have a full tank of willpower gas when you really need it in those friction point moments that oftentimes we struggle with. We struggle in those stressful, hectic, quote unquote, life got in the way situations, oftentimes because we unnecessarily drained that willpower battery and we had nothing left when that friction point hit.
Yeah, finite resources. So that's interesting because a friend of mine texted me the other day, and I challenged the notion that we needed to do everything really hard and grind all the time. And he's like, well, isn't that what it takes to succeed? I'm like, you're gonna hit a wall, right? If you have to do that constantly. I think if you're right at the edge, if you expand your comfort zone, you can find that sweet spot to doing that. So I love that message. And when you think about people who are successful, what would you say is the most common barrier here psychologically to whether X, trying to lose fat, keep it off, whatever it is, the sustainable long-term results?
Yeah, it's the biggest barrier is viewing it as an infinite game. It's viewing it as taking away the finish line, taking away this is a means to an end. If I just do this for X amount of time, then I'm going to live happily ever after. You have to truly view this as like winning the game is just by continuing to play the game. There's no set rules. There's no end score. There's no finish line. And I think that's the biggest mental roadblock. I think so frequently we're like, all right, well, I'm going to do this thing for a short amount of time for a short-term result because I'm really frustrated with how I look and I don't like the way how my clothes don't fit well. So I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off for 6 weeks. I'm going to get this fat off, and then I'm going to go back to doing me. And unfortunately, going back to doing you is what got you in a position where you're uncomfortable. So unless we change the lifelong habits, and it was funny because I was interviewed on a podcast yesterday, and the interviewer was asking about my own routine and how I incorporate balance and flexibility. And I totally it didn't even cross my mind about all the foundational habits that are just second nature because they're it's such routine for me to get 10,000 steps a day. It's such a routine for me to drink water. It's such a routine for me to eat quality food. And I don't even think about it. So my mind didn't even go there until I was like, wait a minute, I feel like I missed all of this context that's really important. So that long-term, I have to become the person who values intentional movement. I have to become the person who prioritizes quality food. I have to become the person who cares about sleep and stress management. And it's that long-term lens that is the biggest roadblock for most people.
Yeah. And it sounds like the balance is not necessarily that you've learned to balance everything per se. It's just that you've built up each habit piece over piece over time to where it's just your routine. In fact, it's within your comfort zone, it sounds like at this point. Whereas for others, if they're starting here, they hear that you do these 20 things every day that they don't do. You don't just jump there, right? You take small steps. So just in concrete terms, what are some strategies or methods people can use to put in place these habits, right? And I know there are a lot of leading theories that you hear about all the time. There's SMART goals, there's self-determination theory, tiny habits, nudging, you name it. And it can be overwhelming. What's helpful for folks?
So my philosophy is every process of change has to start with awareness. Awareness precedes change. And if you're not aware of the gap that exists, then it's going to be really difficult. And you're going to find yourself making those mistakes, like you mentioned, trying to do everything at once, which is another one of the biggest mistakes that people make. It's the classic New Year's mindset. Like, well, I didn't eat well over the holidays. I gained 10 pounds. New year, new me. I'm going to change everything all at once because we vision this perfect version of ourselves, and that creates a dopamine response in the brain. It's really exciting to think about how fit and happy we're going to be and how lean we're going to look. And, the summer is going to roll around. I'm going to rock my favorite bathing suit. All these things play out in our brains. And just the thought and the visualization gives you that dopamine hit that our brains crave. And so it's really exciting to be like, all right, well, here we go. I'm going to cut my calories. I'm going to eat more protein. I'm going to go for walks. I'm going to lift weights. I'm going to be in the gym every day. I'm going to take my supplements, drink my water, get my sleep, all at once. But that is impossible to sustain. And so the first part of that is creating awareness around the gap that exists between where you are and where you want to be. And an easy way to do that is just think about the person that you want to become. Like, we have that vision of the person that we want to become. And that's all. The nice part about it is it's through your own personal lens. It's a vision based off your own value and value system, your value hierarchy. So when you think about that person that you want to become, like, what does that person do? What are their habits? How would they handle stressful situations? What does their nutrition look like? What physical appearance? Like, what are all these things and characteristics that exist within the person that you want to become? And now that we have that list, now we can look at what are you doing now? And now we have a clear gap between the person you want to become and the person you are now. The key here is that you have to be the one to decide what's the most doable, because that's going to be different. I could take the same exact list for 10 different people and say, hey, of this list, like, what's the easiest thing for you to improve upon? What's the easiest habit for you to instill? And I might get 10 different answers. For some people, it might be really overwhelming to think about getting to the gym 4 days a week. For other people, that might be easy. For some people, it might be really difficult to think about, a daily walk because they have a really sedentary job or whatever the case may be. But for other people, that might be like, yeah, you know what? I can set an alarm and walk for 10 minutes every day, no problem. So the key is you're the one that's choosing which, maybe 1, 2, at most 3 action items you want to start to instill, and then actually put it down. Like, create a little commitment card for yourself, put it down on paper, grab a sticky note, put it on your computer, something that you can remind yourself of, like, this is what a successful day looks like for me. It's 2 to 3 things, maybe it's 1 nutrition thing, 1 mindset thing, and 1 training thing or movement thing. It's like, I'm going to eat protein with breakfast. I'm going to get a 10-minute walk in, and I'm going to, have a, moment of gratitude every single day. And those are my 3 things. And that's what success looks like. And that way you're not measuring success against, did I hit my macros perfectly? Did I work out 7 days this week? Did I follow this, supplement routine? Like, it's not 10 different things. It's just very basic 3 things. And now you give yourself credit when you complete those 3 things. You follow through on your commitment card. And what that does is it solidifies the behavior, because you get a dopamine response when you complete the task. And that's how we solidify new habits. And it builds self-trust. And every time you follow through on those commitments that you make to yourself, you're just making little deposits into that self-trust bank account, because we're all too comfortable with breaking promises that we make to ourselves. And the more that we do it, the easier that it gets, and the less that you believe yourself when you say you're going to do something. So we've got to reverse that. We have to continue to build self-trust through following through on those commitments that we make.
Deposits into your self-trust bank account. I love that, because you're right. A lot of times we're maybe trying to please someone else, or maybe trying to meet some standard that isn't right for us at the time. And you said that it starts with awareness. Awareness precedes change. Where do you want to be? Adam Bornstein, he came up with a book recently where he talks about the comfort zone and the expanded comfort zone, and then the extreme comfort zone. And it's like, you're trying to jump over here instead of here. So somebody comes in and they're eating 50 grams of protein. They want to eat 150 and they want to do it every day. You can't just jump to that, and you've got to take the tiny steps. So I think that's great, Mike. I like analogies. So how we use nutritional periodization, right? And that's part of a way to take stress off the body, to recover, to focus on extremes for a short time, like you said, with fat loss, and then take a break. Is there something like that for the mind, right? Like a psychological periodization model, right? Where you go all out developing and growing your mental skills, then you take time to recover, take some stress off. Just curious if you've thought of it that way.
Well, anything that we want to improve upon, the process of improvement happens through the rest and recovery period. You can't just kind of like push the gas pedal and reach the finish line or acquire a new skill. So like, when you try to learn an instrument, it's very mentally taxing. It's, you don't know, your brain and your muscles aren't quite firing. You're like, this is a whole new thing. You're trying to learn how to read music. There's a lot of mental energy that's being expended in that process of learning. You don't learn it when you're sitting there playing. You actually learn it when you're sleeping, when you're recovering, when you give your brain the time to assimilate all of that information that was just overloaded. And it's like, okay, let me file this stuff away, and then we can retrieve it easier the next time. But that process takes time. So like everything that we do, there needs to be a heavy dose of recovery. And it's, sometimes it's a little bit intangible, because certain things can be a stressor on one individual and de-stressing for another individual. So An example is if I am taking a walk and I'm in nature and I'm admiring, oh my God, look at how beautiful the trees are. Look at the sky. This is wonderful. That's going to be very calming and soothing. It's going to put me into that rest and digest state. Another individual is walking and they're thinking, oh my God, I don't know if I paid this bill. Oh my God, I have this deadline that's due. I have so much work on my plate. Oh, what are my kids up to? I got to check in. I got to do it. Like, that's going to be very stressful. Same exact activity, just different thought process. One's going to be a stressor. One's going to be stress relief. So it's sometimes a little bit intangible, but an easy thing to consider is that any period of stress should be followed up by an equal dose or an extra dose of recovery. And if we can at least try to process things through that lens, it becomes a little bit more actionable, because you might recognize that maybe you need to journal a little bit more, do some breathing exercises, just, listen to music and unwind and do things that are good for your mental state. And again, this applies mental, physical, it doesn't matter. Any skill, anything that self-development, you're trying to improve physically, you're trying to improve mentally, the same principles apply across the board. It's 100% imperative to have that dose of recovery with every dose of stress.
I can really relate to this, and I know you can too, as a really busy guy. There's a lot of busy people listening here who maybe have multiple businesses, multiple things that they're doing. I don't know about you. I could just get into a zone for hours and hours and days, trying to get stuff done. And before long, the stress has gone maybe past that point. How does somebody recognize that? And then how can they find something that works for them? If it isn't the walking, like in the example you said, where they can just recognize it and maybe block it in, plan for it. How does that look?
Yeah. So it's reading the symptoms and listening to, the inputs and outputs. And sometimes that's hard. If you have been accustomed to just, being on overdrive all the time, which I can certainly relate to, but you start to learn through experience. You start to learn little subtleties. I know that for me, typically I'm two cups of coffee in the morning, and that's my routine. I know when I'm overly stressed and I'm not getting enough sleep, I'm not getting enough recovery, it's just this like instinctual pull that's like, go get a third cup, go get a third cup. And like that usually never happens. Normally I have my 2 cups, I'm perfectly content and I'm done. But for me, I know when that little subconscious pull is telling me like, go get another cup, I know that I've been on overdrive. And there's little, you'll start to notice maybe some brain fog, fatigue. You might notice an impact in like sex drive or you might be getting a little bit sick more frequently. So there's always little subtleties that your body will communicate when it needs more recovery than anything else. And, sometimes it can be performance in the gym, strength. You notice that you just don't have it like you normally do. So all of those can be signs that something's off. In terms of the recovery, kind of modality that works well for you, trial and error is the best way. So, come up with some different things that you think would be interesting. Like, what are some activities that you love, things that are just for pure enjoyment, hobbies that you might have? For me, it's walking, journaling, doing some like getting in the sauna. If I'm really struggling, like I'll book a massage, doing things like that. Listening to music, unwinding, listening to a podcast, whatever it is for you, just play around with some different strategies and see which one feels the best, and then start to implement that more frequently. And that's really trial and error is the best way.
Yeah, it's good advice.
The most value that I got from this was the fact that I had someone that I could talk to about anything and that there was going to be no judgment. It was just, well, here are your goals. Here's the best way that you're going to achieve it. And then let's work together to help you feel inspired and motivated to do that. And there's a lot of people out there trying to be coaches, and not all of them have done the work. And also just be a genuine person that is positive and coming from the heart in terms of wanting to help. And Philip really embodied all of those qualities. I would recommend him to just about anyone that's looking to achieve goals in that realm of their nutrition and building new habits.
I know, and you've probably seen clients, and I do as well, who having the third party perspective with somebody who knows you, or maybe somebody in your family or who loves you or whatever, to help you there. Because I do get the sense some people get caught up in their stressful routine where it seems like the normal. And all of a sudden you have a third party who might be able to look in and say, well, based on your biofeedback or based on your experience this week, something might be happening and we want to address that. Going back to your very original answer about having support. So another thing that comes up when we talk about psychology of goal achievement is not only the fear of not hitting your goals and your failure, but what about the fear of success? This comes up a lot when I talk to people who are very successful in their lives in multiple areas, maybe not in fitness, but in lots of other areas. And they're maybe afraid of what life will be like once they achieve their goal, right? Like their relationships might change, their self-image might change, the pressure to maintain the new weight, the fear that after they lose the weight, they're still not happy. So how often do you encounter this and what can be done about it?
The same root. It's we don't know what's going to happen. We start to play out these narratives and these stories that feel very real. So anytime we have like anxiety, fear, it's all future-based thinking. So we think about, and a lot of times it's subconscious. If you have somebody who's been, kind of, they didn't get a lot of attention, that, kind of stayed under the radar, never were the center of attention or didn't get noticed that often. And then all of a sudden they start to improve their body, they start to work on themselves, and then they start to get some compliments. Somebody at the gym mentioned that I'm doing a good job. Somebody at the gym said, oh, have you lost weight? Like, that's weird. And it just starts to plant this little seed that then creates a story of, this is scary because we've never been here before. We don't know what's going to happen. Like, we've never been that person to get noticed. We've never been that person to get attention. So it's the fear of the unknown. What's going to happen if this continues, if I start getting more attention, if I start, right? And it's just your brain is really smart and really only cares about survival. And so things that were unknown and unpredictable from an evolutionary standpoint were a threat to our survival. Like if, when we were hunter gatherers, if I knew, there was a saber-toothed tiger that always hung out at this particular watering hole, like I could stay away from that place and increase my odds of survival. So predictability is a strong desire for your brain. So anything that's uncertain, anything that's new, that's why it's often met with this first initial dose of fear and anxiety. And sometimes we sabotage and pull ourselves back into a known, predictable situation. One of my favorite quotes is from Virginia Satir, and she says, "Most prefer the certainty of misery to the misery of uncertainty." And it's the reason why some people will stay in a toxic relationship, because I would rather the known, comfortable, certain misery than to leave and go into this place of unpredictability. So it's the devil, and that's really where it comes from. Fear of success. It's a similar kind of mental trick that your brain plays on you. Now, fortunately, we've evolved and we've expanded. We have this thing called the prefrontal cortex, which allows us to think long-term, think about delayed gratification, think about what we truly want and our desires and our dreams. And we get to think about the future. And we're no longer just this like kind of primitive, lizard brain creature. We actually have the ability to pause and plan and make long-term decisions. Although there's kind of this battle going on because we still have that DNA, that hardwiring that tells us to survive in the moment. But we also have this brain that has evolved to think long-term. So sometimes those can be competing. So it's like, who do I listen to? Do I listen to the survival-based brain or the long-term, the long-term delayed gratification brain? And that's where being able to sit with those feelings and those fears and emotions and really ask yourself difficult and uncomfortable questions like, what does happen if I continue to get more compliments? What does happen if I continue to get noticed? What does happen if I become this new person who does stand out in a crowd because they have more muscle or they're leaner or whatever? What does that mean? What is the story that I'm telling myself around this? And what is it that I truly want? What is it that, what are my highest priorities? What do I value? What do I really want out of this journey? And then hopefully we can make a decision that's more in alignment with that outcome that we desire versus just a reactive, self-sabotaging pattern because we let that survival-based brain win and tell us that it's scary, it's unpredictable, it's uncertain. So it all dials back, or it all circles back to kind of that same root cause of fear of the unknown.
It's an interesting concept because change is always going to be there. Like we're always going to be improving, always growing, and always changing. And I know for my clients, we get to the point where they've embodied that identity of an athlete, because that's the language that I like to use. Like we're trying to be an athlete and they still don't want to accept it sometimes. Hey, you are. And that's why people are complimenting you and you've done the hard work and Yeah, it's easy to eat food now because you're not, caught up in the short term. So it is important, and I like that you brought it back to psychology and the brain, and like we have control over this stuff. We just have to sit with them and think about them. So another aspect of psychology, it comes up a lot, is framing, right? Language and framing, like the phrase "falling off the wagon," right? Getting off track, the all or nothing, or even what I hear all the time, especially with newer clients, is like, I can't do this, or I had to do this, like these out of control framing versus something that you chose to do. And then self-labeling, which we've already covered a little bit. So what are your principles on language, internal dialogue, framing that can help people?
Yeah, it's always, again, going back to awareness. Mental reframing is probably the most powerful, might be the single most powerful tool that we have in the toolbox that everybody has the ability to use at any moment. And it can literally change your whole life in a very short period of time. And what reframing is just changing the lens through which you view the situation, or changing the narrative that you have around the situation. I think so often we get caught up in believing every thought that we have as fact. We have tens of thousands of thoughts every single day. So it's unreasonable to think that they're all based in truth. And in fact, most of them are not. And the other problem that we often run into is that we use emotions as reasons to react or act immediately instead of sitting with those uncomfortable emotions. And I say uncomfortable in particular, it can be any emotion, but a lot of times we look at emotions as, okay, I have to immediately respond to this because I feel something, so let me do something about it, instead of sitting and just processing and like kind of being the detective. What is this trying to tell me? And what's the story that I really want to create? So the mental reframe is where you don't believe all of your thoughts as fact. So when you do have a thought and you do catch yourself saying, I can't be consistent, or I'm a people pleaser, or labeling, or however you're trying to frame a specific situation, it's first awareness and being able to shine a flashlight on that. Now, again, coming back to kind of a recurring theme here, it really helps to have somebody who's an objective kind of perspective on the way that you're communicating with yourself. Because if you're not aware of it, we need to go from that unconscious belief to bringing that to the forefront and showing you like, hey, this is what you said about yourself. Now, like, let's digest it real quick and break this down. So having somebody to help you through that process. But once you're aware and you start to catch yourself in those moments of labeling and saying, I am a people pleaser, I can't do X, Y, Z, it's catching, having that red flag. Like anytime I hear the word can't, it's going to be a trigger word for me, and I'm going to explore it. Like, why did I just say I can't do? Let me reframe it in a way that's more productive. So the reframe is, let me just shift the lens through which I see this situation. I'm not a people pleaser. I have the tendency to people please, and I'm actively working on it. Like, what a better frame. More productive, more effective. And then, so those are the things, like you can change the frame on any situation. I've listened to therapists, some of them who I know personally, some of them who I've just listened through courses and through lectures and podcasts, talk about helping people overcome serious trauma, addiction, toxic relationships, things that you would think typically would take years and years and years of work. And I've listened to them talk about a mental reframe that completely pulled them out of that situation in as little as minutes. And I know that can seem extreme, but that's the power of being able to reframe certain situations and perspectives to better suit the narrative that best serves you.
Yeah, I think it is a powerful tool. You're right. And I think part of the way I use it with clients, I learned from you, having listened to your podcast as well, that you hear it all the time when there's any sort of quote unquote failure, right? When you fail to miss some target or do something that you intended to do, and all of a sudden I couldn't do that, or I'm not able to do this, or I am this, and reframing it, like you said, I have a tendency to, or simply saying that I choose to do this because, right? I choose to do this because can be very powerful. What was I going to say about that? Oh, and the other thing that comes to mind is relationships, right? Like if I told my wife some of the things I tell myself in my brain, I wouldn't actually want to say that to her. And I wonder, we're toughest on ourselves sometimes. We show ourselves the least love sometimes. And kind of thinking of that context of, would you tell your spouse or someone that they are this or do this all the time? And how would that make them feel? And kind of putting that back on you. It's just a thought that came to mind. Another aspect of that is gratitude, Mike. Like, is that part of this where expressing gratitude either to yourself or others can come into play here?
Yeah, I think, of course, we want to be kind to ourselves, and there's a lot of things to be grateful for. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. It's a reframe. I think a lot of times we look at, again, this is another kind of cognitive distortion that we all have, that we're all born with, that we can't get rid of. Negative thoughts are more powerful than positive thoughts. And again, this is a survival based mechanism. So instead of being like, oh, my brain is broken, I always focus on the negative. It is to keep you alive. And so we remember negative things more because of survival. So, and I've heard statistics that it can be up to 7 times more powerful. So if you hear, 6 positive things and 1 negative thing, like that kind of balances out. You might focus more on that one single negative thing than the 6 positive things that happen. But it's one of those things you have to actively work on understanding that it is a cognitive bias, it is a cognitive distortion, and I can actively work on focusing on things that I'm grateful for. So even in the moments where it feels like, oh, you know what, like this day is just like, it's not going my way, there's probably things in that moment that you can reframe. Now, with a caveat of trying to immediately like change a negative situation into a positive can actually be a negative. Instead of just letting yourself feel that, like, you know what? Yeah, this day does suck, and that's okay. And like, I'm allowed to feel, I'm allowed to feel sad. I'm allowed to feel down about this day. I'm allowed to feel frustrated, and giving yourself permission. I think sometimes we immediately try to like get out of it. We're like, oh no, I don't want to feel sad. Let me like fix it arbitrarily. And like your brain's like, we're not going there. And then you have this kind of internal battle instead of just letting yourself feel the feelings and letting it pass, like treating like your feelings are all transient. They're going to pass. They're going to go away. They're going to, it's like the clouds. Let's just watch them float on by. And that's like one of the most effective things you can do. And then when you are feeling a little bit better, maybe then is a good time to bring yourself to a place of gratitude.
Yeah, your emotions are like clouds floating by or a river flowing by. I've heard that analogy. And it's true, because it's okay to feel disappointment, right? You want to be disappointed in the moment. That's okay. And let it sit, because that also might drive you later on. I know from many, many times, personal experience, I can look back and say, I don't really want to feel that way in the future when that happens. So now I'm going to choose to do something different. And that's an important way to let that fuel you. So earlier you talked about short-term versus long-term, right? Short-term being something like a specific phase, let's say a fat loss phase. How do we balance celebrating like the mission accomplished and the win? Even if it took us 3 months and now we have that win, from the lifelong endeavor, the principles and practices behind it being sustainable? Like, how do you balance those two things?
Yeah. So ideally, we would be more focused on the process-based wins and not the outcome-based wins, because the outcome-based wins are largely out of your control. When it happens, sure, celebrate by all means. Like if we reward ourselves and we celebrate, you know what, I followed through on these 3 commitments today. And then, I was at the gym and I hit a PR. Amazing. Like let's celebrate the process-based goals along the way. But then you're going to wake up and you're going to be like, oh my God, I didn't even notice. I'm actually down 10 pounds. I hit my 10 pound. Like, great. Let's celebrate that. But let's not make that the target of like, hey, when we get to this 10 pound, like let's run to this checkpoint so that we can celebrate. What we really should be focusing on short term is process-based goals. And if we can do that, the outcome will happen as a byproduct. But you can't, like, when the outcome happens, how long it takes to get there, the exact number, like a lot of that's largely out of our control. So let's focus on the things that we can control. And another concept that I talk about frequently is, celebrating like neutral days. Like we always celebrate the big milestones, but we celebrate when somebody loses 100 pounds, which is amazing. Like, what an achievement. But we don't ever celebrate the person that didn't gain 100 pounds to begin with, that they had to lose. And it was like, when neutral things happen and it was just, I just maintained, and there's nothing sexy about that. There's nothing flashy about that. But like, why don't we celebrate that? Why don't we celebrate the neutral days where, hey, I didn't blow myself up today. I didn't, go off the rails today. That's a win. And even no matter what that looks like, even it was just like, I did the bare minimum. I had protein with breakfast, and then, I didn't really eat much protein after that. And I got a 5-minute walk in, but I couldn't get to the gym today. It's all right. That's a win. nothing horrible.
It's not a zero. Yeah.
Not a zero.
Yeah.
It's something. But so I find that celebrating neutral days and celebrating when bad things don't happen is really important, and like focusing on the process more than the outcome.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, you think of clients who check in and everything was fine and nothing has to change. And you're like, how do I keep motivating this client? And part of it is to just celebrate the fact that all the things you worked to this point have continued. That's a good thing. And then as far as the process-based wins, I've heard this a lot, and people ask, well, how exactly do I do that? One thing you've already mentioned today is if you only focus on 2 or 3 things, or even one thing that you're trying to improve, the win from that is the process, right? It is ingraining in yourself this routine and discipline from that process for the process-based win. So just throwing that out there. Curious, very specific thing here. I know you work with a lot of clients who want to lose fat, and I don't know how many people you work with who are built on the other side, who are gaining and building muscle in a calorie surplus, but they also face certain psychological limitations that are not symmetric. Let's say there's like different things that they have to focus on. What's your experience on that side of the journey?
Probably the hardest year of my life was where I decided to actively build muscle for a year. I was like, 12 months, I'm going to follow what my coach says, and because my pattern up until that point was like, you know what, I really want to build some muscle. So I would start to increase my calories. I would start to see the scale go up, and I'd be like, that's uncomfortable. Let me just cut my calories again. And a lot of people fall into that pattern. Yeah. Because it's scary. You're like, oh, am I going to gain a bunch of fat? Like, I really want to build muscle. I don't want to get heavier. I don't want to go back. Like, we all have that panic number that we see on the scale. And so I think that mentally it can be more challenging to really commit to a building phase where you're feeling a little bit fluffy. You're seeing the scale go up. It's, you're eating more food than you thought you had to. It's not easy. It was the most difficult and probably the most rewarding year, because it helped me in so many ways with more flexibility. Because I had more muscle, I could eat more freely. Because I had more muscle, I looked better at a higher weight. Like, there were so many things that were just really rewarding. But the process of building muscle is slower than the process of losing fat. And fat loss can be a slow process depending on, what type of an approach you're taking. Building muscle is even slower. So you're looking for like really small incremental improvements. And it's almost one of those things where, again, we kind of have to do like a little sleight of hand trick. Like, hey, look over here at how much strength you're building in the gym. Yep. Let's celebrate this workout, instead of like really dialing in on metrics and body composition, because that process, we really have to look at that over months and then be like, hey, look at this difference in muscle definition, and look at how much, more filled out your chest, your arms, whatever it may be. So yeah, it can be mentally very difficult. And I think that, again, have a support system, have a coach to take some of that burden off of you.
Yeah, totally agree. And you may not even notice some of the muscle definition for a while as the fat is building, and that adds to the challenge. But you're right, focusing on other things, sleight of hand sort of. There are many, many metrics. It's kind of like the non-scale metrics during fat loss. There's also say body comp or physique metrics while you're gaining this weight. All right, I'm curious about this. If you had never become a nutrition coach and got into this space, what would you be doing instead?
That's a great question. Well, considering I tried a number of different things and none of it stuck. Like, I never imagined that I would be a nutrition coach. I never imagined that I'd be doing what I do. So I had bounced around from I bartended for like 10 years. I tried HR. I was in sales for a little bit. And then I started a company that was kind of like an internet company that was based around the same concept of like Groupon. But I did like a local version of that. I tried everything. And it was not until I found my passion that I, was like kind of just by dumb luck that I landed in a role as a personal trainer, and then found my passion in nutrition, and then did this. So if I had to like start all over again, I think what I would do is I would probably get a law degree, which my grandfather, who I named my company after, begged me to get a law degree. And I was just done with school at that point. I did not want to do any more after college. After I graduated, I was like, I've done enough schooling, so I'm out on that. But I'd probably have gotten my law degree and maybe go into something in like I don't know. I love sports, so I like want to connect the dots there. Maybe go into like, I don't know, an agent or something for something that I could use my legal background in the sports world and marry those two and do something along those lines. But
for sure, and a lot of these psychological skills you've learned seem like they would fit right in there as well. So, that's pretty cool. So I like to ask this question of all guests, Mike, and that is there a question you wish I had asked, and what is your answer?
I think you covered it all. There's nothing that stands out to me about any kind of missing question. Normally, if there's something I'm like, oh, we could have gone in this direction, then I'd bring it up. But I feel like you kind of nailed everything that was on my mind today.
Cool. So it was a solid interview with an amazing guest. I want listeners to know where they can learn more about you and your work.
Yeah. So best place to listen to me is on the Mind Over Macros podcast. So anywhere that you listen, you can just search Mind Over Macros. You can find me there. If you ever have questions or need anything, I do personally respond to all of my Instagram DMs, and it's not where I say that I respond and then it's somebody else. It's actually me. So if you message me on Instagram, it's at coach_Mike_Millner. Nothing is off limits. I'll send voice memos sometimes. I'll have people ask me like, hey, if you were my coach, what would you do? And I'm like, well, you could either hire me or you could take this feedback and run with it. And so I answer everything and I try to provide as much context as possible for any questions. So those are the best two places.
Cool. So I'll add your IG to the show notes. Mike is a super accessible, responsive guy, like he said. Very friendly guy. And his podcast, Mind Over Macros, actually has two types of episodes now. One focused on kind of the nutrition coaching, training, and all of that. And then the other more for coaches in the space. But whoever you are, they're both fascinating and you're going to learn a ton. So definitely follow Mind Over Macros. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Wits and Weights. If you found value in today's episode and know someone else who's looking to level up their wits or weights, please take a moment to share this episode with them. And make sure to hit the follow button in your podcast platform right now to catch the next episode. Until then, stay strong.